Hey yo, listen.
Drop it low to the flow. Oh.
Like it like that.
Yeah. Oh. Are you ready for this?
All right, so you brought us some sources today about Elon Musk, and specifically, we're going to be talking about that gesture he made at Trump's inauguration.
Yeah.
And it's a moment that was caught on video, sparking a lot of debate online, and we really want to kind of dive in today and try to understand what went down.
Yeah. What's really interesting, I think, is that, a single gesture can kind of ignite this firestorm. We're not talking about, just a way for a thumbs up here. We're talking about a very specific action that he did, and it happened at a very charged political event. And because of that, it immediately drew comparisons to something much darker, the Nazi salute.
Whoa, okay, that's heavy stuff right off the bat.
Yeah.
So for those of us maybe who aren't familiar with the specifics, can you break down like what Musk actually did? What did this gesture look like?
Okay, so picture this. Musk is at the podium during the inauguration, and he brings his right hand up to his chest in a slapping motion, then extends his arm diagonally outward. It's that combination of movements that set off alarm bells for a lot of people.
Yep, I see. And I can definitely understand why that would raise eyebrows, given the historical context, and what was the immediate reaction like online?
It was like a digital explosion. Platforms like X, formerly Twitter, were flooded with comments expressing concern, outraged people, drawing parallels to the Nazi salute, and highlighting its, association with this horrific period in history.
So this wasn't just a case of people overreacting. This gesture really tapped into some very real and very painful historical trauma.
Yeah, and the atrocities that were committed under that symbol.
What was Musk's response to this, avalanche of criticism? Did he try to clarify his intent at all or apologize for any unintentional offense?
His response on X was interesting, to say the least. He dismissed the accusations as tired and implied that his critics were resorting to dirty tricks. But what was really curious is that he never directly addressed the gesture itself.
Oh, wow.
Which kind of intensified the debate.
Okay, so instead of calming the waters, his response kind of threw gasoline on the fire.
Yeah.
It almost seems like he was intentionally trying to provoke a reaction. But surely not everyone saw it that way.
You're absolutely right. This is where we see a clear split in opinion.
Good.
On one side, you have critics who view this gesture as a deliberate act, potentially signaling that Musk is aligning himself with far-right ideologies. And those concerns were further fueled by some of Musk's other recent actions, like his support for Germany's AfD party.
Hold on, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Can you give us a quick explainer on the AfD? What do they stand for, and why is their association with Musk raising red flags?
Yeah. So the AfD Alternative for Germany is a political party known for its right-wing populist views. They've been criticized for their stance on immigration, Islam, and rhetoric that some see as xenophobic and nationalistic. So even if limited, Musk's support for such a party was seen by many as a signal of his own potentially shifting political leanings.
So it sounds like there was already a sense of unease about Musk's political views, and then this gesture at the inauguration just amplified those concerns. But you mentioned there was another side to this story, people who defended Musk and saw this whole thing differently.
Exactly. Musk has a very vocal and dedicated group of supporters who saw this whole controversy as an overblown, politically motivated attack. They attribute the gesture to his awkwardness, a quirk that many of his followers are familiar with, and really view the backlash as an attempt to smear his reputation.
So we have these two very distinct camps forming: those who saw the gesture as intentional and potentially dangerous, and those who saw it as a harmless mistake blown out of proportion by his opponents. It seems like people were kind of projecting their existing views of Musk onto this ambiguous action.
That's a really insightful observation. It speaks to the power of confirmation bias, how we tend to interpret information in a way that reinforces our existing beliefs. And in this case, Musk's prior actions and statements had already primed people to view him through a particular lens.
It's like this gesture became a Rorschach test, with people seeing what they wanted to see based on their own pre-existing opinions of Musk.
Yeah.
Did any organizations try to step in and offer a more neutral or objective perspective on this whole situation?
Yes. The Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, weighed in on the controversy. They acknowledged the public's concern, but ultimately suggested that the gesture was likely unintentional. What's key here is how they arrived at that conclusion. They emphasized the importance of considering the full context of an action, not just a fleeting moment caught on camera.
So instead of rushing to judgment based on a split-second image, the ADL tried to take a more holistic approach, looking at the bigger picture. Could you give us an example of what kind of contextual factors they might have considered?
Certainly. So the ADL looks at things like the individual's history, their past statements, the specific circumstances surrounding the event. They also take into account whether the gesture was repeated, whether it was directed at anyone in particular, and the overall tone of the individual's behavior.
That makes sense. It's like investigating a crime scene. You don't just focus on one piece of evidence. You try to gather as much information as possible before drawing any conclusions.
Yeah.
But even with the ADL's attempt to kind of de-escalate the situation, this wasn't just a local controversy, right? The internet has a way of amplifying things globally.
Absolutely. And this incident garnered international attention, and reactions varied depending on cultural and historical sensitivities. Germany, in particular, had a very strong response.
Well, that's understandable given their history. Can you elaborate on why the reaction in Germany was particularly strong?
Well, in Germany, any display of Nazi symbols or gestures is strictly prohibited due to their history with the Nazi regime. It's a deeply sensitive issue, and for good reason. So when this video of Musk surfaced, it triggered this wave of condemnation from prominent figures in Germany.
Do you have any examples of those reactions? Like, what were people saying?
Michel Friedman, a well-known German-French publicist, called Musk's actions a disgrace, and even suggested that this behavior from Musk could pose a danger to the free world.
Wow, that's a pretty serious accusation. Did anyone else echo those sentiments?
Charlotte Knobloch, president of the Jewish community in Munich and Upper Bavaria, described the gesture as highly irritating. And the fact that these figures who carry significant weight in German society felt compelled to speak out shows just how seriously this incident was taken in that context.
So we've gone from a seemingly spontaneous gesture at an American inauguration to sparking international outrage and condemnation. It's fascinating how one small action can have such a ripple effect. But I'm curious, how did groups that actually align with far-right ideologies react to all of this? Did they condemn Musk's gesture, or did they see it differently?
This is where things get even more complicated. So Vanity Fair reported that far-right commentators and groups, including some with very extreme and hateful views, actually seized on this incident.
Oh, well.
They interpreted it as a sign of support from Musk, further muddying the waters and making it even harder to discern the true intent behind the gesture.
That's incredibly troubling. So not only did this incident spark debate among those concerned about potential far-right leanings, it also inadvertently provided fuel for those very groups. It's almost as if this gesture, regardless of its intended meaning, became a battleground for competing ideologies.
And to add another layer of complexity, this all happened within the highly charged political landscape surrounding Trump's presidency.
You're saying this Musk incident can't be viewed in isolation. It was happening alongside a larger conversation about Trump, his associates, and their alleged ties to far-right ideologies.
Exactly. As Vanity Fair pointed out, this Musk incident became entangled with the broader scrutiny of Trump and his administration. It played into existing fears about the rise of far-right sentiments and the potential influence of those ideologies within the American government.
Wow, this is a lot to unpack. We've gone from a single gesture to international reactions, historical sensitivities, and the political climate surrounding Trump's presidency. It's amazing how much can be gleaned from what essentially amounts to a few seconds of video footage.
And that's just the beginning. This incident raises so many questions about the power of symbols, the challenges of interpreting actions in a digital age, and the responsibility of public figures in a hyper-connected world. We've only just scratched the surface.
You know, it's fascinating how this one gesture by Musk just kind of tapped into so many different anxieties and pre-existing narratives. It's like it became this focal point for like this whole web of societal tensions that were already kind of simmering beneath the surface.
Yeah, it really highlights how in our current information landscape, a single event can be interpreted and reinterpreted through countless different lenses, often fueled by, pre-existing biases and political affiliations. And the internet, for all its benefits, plays a significant role in amplifying these divisions.
Right. I mean, think about it, like without the constant scrutiny of social media and like the 24/7 news cycle, this incident might have just been like a fleeting, awkward moment that was quickly forgotten. Instead it was captured, shared, and just dissected endlessly online.
You've hit on a crucial point. The way we consume information has fundamentally changed. We're bombarded with news, opinions, and interpretations at this overwhelming pace, and it can be incredibly difficult to kind of sift through it all and form a balanced understanding of what's actually happening.
Yeah. And in a way, this whole Musk situation kind of feels like a cautionary tale. It shows how easy it is to just jump to conclusions based on these snippets of information, especially when those snippets are filtered through like the lens of our own biases.
Absolutely. It underscores the importance of critical thinking. Seeking out multiple perspectives and being mindful of how our own preconceived notions can color our judgment. We need
Right.
to actively engage with information, question it, and look for a more complete understanding rather than just passively absorbing whatever pops up on our feeds.
You mentioned how the internet can amplify these controversies, and I've heard people talk about echo chambers and filter bubbles online.
Yeah.
Can you explain how those work and how they might have contributed to the polarization we saw in this Musk incident?
It's all about algorithms, those behind the scenes systems that determine what content we see online, and they're designed to show us more of what we've already engaged with, which can create these echo chambers where we're only exposed to information that reinforces our existing beliefs, like being trapped in a filter bubble where dissenting voices are silenced.
So if someone already had like a negative view of Musk, the algorithms might have fed them like a constant stream of content confirming that view, making them even more convinced that this gesture was intentional and malicious. And the same would be true for like his supporters just in reverse.
Precisely, the algorithms aren't necessarily designed to promote one ideology over another. It's more about engagement. They prioritize content that triggers strong emotions, whether it's outrage, excitement, or fear, and unfortunately, that can often lead to the amplification of extreme viewpoints, making it even harder to have nuanced and productive conversations.
It's like this vicious cycle. The more extreme the content, the more engagement it gets, and the more the algorithms push it to the top, further fueling the polarization. It's no wonder we're seeing such intense debates and divisions online.
And that's why initiatives like this deep dive are so crucial. They provide a space to slow down, to examine a complex issue from multiple angles, and to resist the urge to oversimplify or accept easy answers. We need more spaces like this to foster critical thinking and informed dialogue.
I totally agree. It's so easy to get swept up in the outrage machine, to react impulsively to every headline or viral tweet. Deep dives force us to pause, to reflect, and to consider the nuances that are often lost in the rush to judgment.
And when it comes to sensitive topics like this one, those nuances are incredibly important. Remember, we were talking about how differently people interpreted Musk's gesture. Some saw it as like a clear-cut Nazi salute, others saw it as harmless, and still others saw it as something in between.
Right, and it's that in-between space that I think deserves more attention. The fact that people can look at the same action and come away with such different interpretations should tell us something about like the complexities of human perception and communication.
hmm It speaks to the power of symbols and how their meaning can be fluid and context dependent. The Nazi salute in particular is so heavily charged with historical baggage that any action, even remotely resembling it, is bound to trigger strong reactions.
And when you factor in Musk's own controversial statements and actions leading up to this event, it's understandable why people were so quick to draw conclusions, even if those conclusions were based more on their preconceived notions of Musk than on the gesture itself.
It's a reminder that we don't view the world through neutral lenses. Our past experiences, beliefs, and values all shape how we perceive and interpret information, especially when it comes to complex and emotionally charged issues.
But that doesn't mean we're doomed to live in a world of constant misinterpretations and misunderstandings, right?
Not at all. It just means we need to be more aware of those filters, those biases that can distort our perceptions. We need to actively work to overcome them by seeking out diverse perspectives, questioning our assumptions, and engaging in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views.
It's about cultivating that sense of intellectual humility, recognizing that we don't have all the answers and that there's always more to learn. And that's especially important when dealing with public figures who hold positions of power and influence. Their actions, their words, their gestures. They all carry extra weight and can have a real impact on society, whether intended or not.
You've hit the nail on the head. Public figures have a responsibility to be mindful of their actions and the messages they send, especially in today's hyper-connected world. But at the same time, we as consumers of information also have a responsibility to think critically, to avoid rushing to judgment, and to engage in thoughtful dialogue that moves beyond simplistic interpretations and easy answers.
I love that responsibility on both sides. It's the two-way street.
Exactly. It's about fostering a culture of accountability where public figures are held to high standards, but where we also hold ourselves accountable for the ways in which we consume, interpret, and share information.
That's a really powerful idea. It's not just about pointing fingers or placing blame. It's about recognizing the shared responsibility we all have in shaping a more informed, nuanced, and empathetic public discourse. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the whole Elon Musk controversy, it's clear we've uncovered way more than just like a simple story about a gesture. It's like we peeled back the layers of an onion, revealing all these complex issues about online culture, political polarization, the challenges of interpreting actions in a digital age.
Yeah, it really speaks to how interconnected everything is these days. Like a seemingly isolated event can become a lightning rod, sparking debates that touch on a whole web of, societal anxieties and pre-existing narratives.
Yeah.
It's almost like this Musk incident became a mirror reflecting back at us all the tensions and divisions that already existed within society.
That's a great analogy of the mirror. And when you think about it, that's often how symbols work, right? They can hold different meanings for different people, reflecting back their own beliefs, values, and fears.
Precisely. And the Nazi salute, given its horrific historical context, carries an especially heavy weight. Any action that even remotely resembles it is bound to trigger strong emotional responses, particularly in those who have been directly impacted by the horrors of that regime.
So when we see a public figure like Elon Musk making a gesture that some interpret as a Nazi salute, it's understandable why that would spark such intense debate and scrutiny. And as we've discussed, Musk's own past statements and actions, like his support for the AFT party, likely added fuel to that fire.
Absolutely. The context in which an action occurs matters immensely. And in this case, Musk's gesture wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was taking place within a larger conversation about the rise of far-right ideologies, the political climate surrounding Trump's presidency, and the role of public figures in shaping those narratives.
It's like this incident became a microcosm of all those larger anxieties and debates, a focal point for a whole tangle of complex issues that were already brewing within society.
Yeah. And the internet, with its rapid-fire spread of information and its tendency to amplify extreme viewpoints, played a significant role in shaping how this whole story unfolded, as we discussed earlier. Those algorithms, those behind-the-scenes systems that curate what we see online, often prioritize content that triggers strong emotions, whether it's outrage or excitement. And unfortunately, that can often lead to the amplification of misinformation, conspiracy theories, and divisive rhetoric.
It's like we're constantly being bombarded with information, but without the tools or the time to properly process and assess it all. And in that kind of environment, it's easy to see how misunderstandings can happen, how nuances can get lost, and how even a seemingly innocent gesture can be misinterpreted and twisted to fit pre-existing narratives.
Yeah, and that's why it's so crucial to cultivate those critical thinking skills, to be mindful of our own biases and to seek out a diversity of perspectives. It's not about always agreeing with each other, but about engaging in thoughtful dialogue, listening with empathy, and trying to understand where others are coming from.
It's about recognizing that we all have blind spots, that our own experiences and beliefs can shape how we see the world, and that sometimes even our initial interpretations can be wrong, and that's okay. It's part of being human. The important thing is to be open to learning, to changing our minds when presented with new information, and to approaching these complex issues with a sense of humility and curiosity.
I couldn't agree more. It's about fostering a culture of intellectual humility where we acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, where we're willing to challenge our own assumptions, and where we're open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
And I think that applies to both sides of this Musk controversy, and really to any debate where emotions run high and opinions are divided. Those who are quick to condemn Musk need to ask themselves if they might have let their own biases cloud their judgment, and those who defended him need to be open to the possibility that their interpretation might not be the only valid one.
It's about recognizing the complexity of the situation, acknowledging the possibility of multiple interpretations, and resisting the temptation to reduce everything to simple binaries of good versus bad, right versus wrong. The truth is often much messier and more nuanced than that.
And that's what makes deep dives like this so valuable. They provide a space to slow down, to examine an issue from multiple angles, and to resist the urge to oversimplify or jump to conclusions. They remind us that the world is full of gray areas, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's in those gray areas, those spaces of ambiguity and uncertainty where the most interesting conversations happen, where we can challenge our assumptions, broaden our perspectives, and ultimately come to a more nuanced understanding of the world around us.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I think the key takeaway is this. Let's be more mindful of how we consume information, how we interpret actions, and how we engage in these complex and often emotionally charged debates. Let's cultivate that intellectual humility, that willingness to learn and grow, and that commitment to thoughtful dialogue.
And let's remember that the goal isn't always to find the right answer or to win the argument. It's about understanding, empathizing, and engaging in a way that moves us closer to a more informed, nuanced, and compassionate understanding of the world and each other.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparks some new insights and maybe even challenge a few of your assumptions along the way. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.
Are you ready for this? Oh,
Like it like that. Hey yo, listen.
drop it low to the flow. Oh,
Like it like that.
yeah. Oh, are you ready for this?